I'm Peter Kernahan from Marling School. I'm here with Dr. Martin Wood from the University of Gloucestershire. We've been talking about Buddhism, and we've been going through the life of the Buddha and the teachings of the Buddha. We're going through the four noble truths. The analogy of a doctor is important here. Dr. Buddha tells us the problem is dukkha, is suffering. The reason for the problem is desire, the arising of a desire. And the cure for the desire is nirvana. And we're now on to the medicine, the way to cure nirvana. Dr. Martin, tell us a little bit about the Magga, the pathway, the cure for nirvana, sometimes called the Eightfold Path.
The medicine, indeed. Let me start with a little quote from Damien Keown. "This, O monks, is the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. It is the noble Eightfold Path, and it consists of the right view, the right resolve, the right speech, the right action, the right livelihood, the right effort, the right mindfulness, the right meditation." And that is essentially the medicine encapsulated in 8, not sequential, but cumulative steps on the path towards the final cessation of suffering. Now, when we talk about right means, we mean an acceptance of the basic teachings of the Buddha, the Dhamma, as it were, the Four Noble Truths, for example. Right resolve means having a positive outlook, a mind which is free from lust, from ill will, a mind which is free from cruelty, as it were. Right speech means using speech in a positive, non-divisive way, using it in a productive way. If you have nothing productive to say, it's largely better to actually remain quiet. Right action means keeping the precepts, the 5 precepts, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, the 6 Parangitas for the Mahayana tradition. The right livelihood means avoiding professions which cause harm to others, such as slavery, perhaps even butchery, arms. I think that would negate a substantial amount of our employment in this Western milieu. The right effort means directing the mind towards religious goals, the production and fostering of wholesome states, which is obviously very, very important. Right mindfulness means being, doing and thinking in the correct way according to the Dhamma. And then we have right meditation, which means training the mind to achieve a focused state of attention. It's calming the chattering mind, as it were, getting rid of slowly all of those defilements which we are constantly bombarded with through technology, through constant interaction with the world. That is right meditation. So it's necessary to focus on these factors of the path. Now, it's also well known that these 8-fold components are broken down into different groups, into three further groups. Thus, 8-fold path 3 to 5 relates to morality, sila, 6 to 8 meditation, which is samadhi, and then 1 to 2 is prajna, which is insight. And as I mentioned before, it's important to note that actually this path isn't linear. It is not sequential. It is a step towards practicing all 8
at the same time.
Exactly.
Brilliant. So we earlier in an earlier video looked at the life of the Buddha, and he had this early life of luxury. He then had a period of a real austerity. We know about that in our current climate. And he practiced asceticism, and then he discovers the middle way. In what sense normally is the Eightfold Path thought of as a middle way, and how have others taken the idea of a middle way in a different direction?
Well, I mean, it is simply as you've just described it in the allegory and the story of a Buddha's life. He is experiencing his overwhelming wealth in the palaces, his life of overwhelming luxury. He's a very delicate individual. He even describes himself as being, someone who has to be shaded from the sun and from dust, and he has 3 palaces. And he can move around from each. Everything is very nice, but it is going absolutely nowhere. And when he comes to that existential realization, he goes out, as we've probably already discussed. He practices those austerities. The string of the sitar of which he is becomes so tight that it's liable to snap. Whereas prior to that, it was so flabby and loose, it was making no decent sound whatsoever. So that, almost in the the Theravadan understanding would be very, very much an allegory for
a middle way
that.
between luxuries and austerities.
Indeed, you
by
need
practicing
nourishment,
the
you need to
Eightfold
practice
Path.
the Eightfold Path.
What about within
etc.
the Mahayana tradition? How have they taken this notion of middle way differently?
Well, I mean, you know, there is an understanding that there is, certainly in Nagarjuna's Sunyatavadin position, which is one that holds there is a position of ultimate emptiness. If you are to understand this emptiness, you have to have a middle way between eternalism and annihilationism, an understanding that life is eternal and constant and unchanging, and annihilationism, which is basically exactly what it says, this form of we must be rid of all of life.
So Bhikkhu Bodhi has a different perspective on the Eightfold Path. Instead of the traditional threefold division, he has a twofold division. Let me read from his great little book, The Noble Eightfold Path. He says this: the 8 factors of the path can be divided into 2, one consisting of knowledge and understanding, and the other concerned with practice and conduct. Through this twofold division, we can see the tremendous weight that falls in right view. But that's only for one tradition. What do you think about that, Martin? That wouldn't be agreed upon by everybody, would it?
When we're looking at the Theravadan tradition, we have this discipline of wisdom. We're looking for the nature of consciousness. They're certainly looking for the nature of reality, and this is underpinning their ethical approach on a number of different levels. Whereas with the Mahayana tradition, what they're taking out of that is out of that immediacy, that almost individualistic perspective, and they're actually widening it out. In that wisdom is important. Because it will then bring around an ethical framework. But there's also a bit of a contradiction there, because in order to want to attain wisdom, surely you must have some kind of ethical framework in order to bring that about. But I think that brings it back into the number of different areas that we're going to be looking at a little bit later on as far as Mahayana traditions are concerned. From a critical, synoptical point of view, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, if I may, Peter. Approaching this path critically, what does all this tell us about Buddhist ethics? What kind of beast or thing is the Buddhist ethical approach?
It doesn't, it strikes me, easily fall into one category or another. Classically, it was thought of as a utilitarian, relativist form of ethics. In the burning house parable, the Buddha, the Buddha says it's okay to lie. Sounds very much a utilitarian perspective. If you lie and in a skillful way manage to bring your children out of this house, even though you're lying to them, that's a good thing. So that sounds relativist.
The upaya, the skillful means in order to bring around a more productive solution.
Sounds very utilitarian. And yet you have a summum bonum, you have a Kantian type summum bonum in Nirvana. Perhaps we could argue it's a Kantian ethic. And perhaps Theravada ethics is quite deontological. It's very fixed, it seems. All these Matthew Megaprasar, if you're studying the text, this whole section on rules and rules. Hundreds of rules, that's for monks especially, seems very fixed, very deontological.
Does it miss the compassionate elements of ethical behaviour in the Theravadan tradition, do you think?
Again, links to situation ethics. Jesus' teaching on love for neighbour strikes one as having a real connection with the notion of metta, of compassion, and developing that in yourself, becoming a compassionate person. Sounds very much like situation ethics. But even all of those said, Kantian ethics, situation ethics, utilitarianism, modern scholars like Keown and Harvey would say, in fact, the closest Western example of ethics to Buddhist ethics is perhaps virtue ethics. Aristotle developed the golden mean, a list of virtues that were between opposites. And although the Buddha didn't use that method, he does encourage the development of the virtuous person.
So there's a distinct parallel between the middle way and the golden mean, would you suggest?
Now, there's some real interesting links between Aristotelian virtue ethics and the Buddha's ethics, but there are important differences. There is, as we've said, this golden mean that might be linked with, as you've said, the middle way. But there are some important differences. Aristotle emphasizes the role of virtues for this life. Eudaimonia is developing the well-spirited life, to becoming politically, reaching your potential, emotionally reaching your potential, morally reaching your potential, but the emphasis very much is in this world. And the Theravada ethic probably wouldn't agree with this. Mahayana, however, I think the emphasis in developing compassion, happiness in this life very much does sound like an Aristotelian virtue ethic. So there are good reasons to support Harvey and in particular Keown in arguing that virtue ethics is the closest link with Buddhism ethically today.
Okay, I'm just going to throw something in here very, very quickly. And I know we're going to be talking about secular Buddhism a little bit later on, but it strikes me that the secular Buddhist understanding of this life only is trying to actually bring together the Aristotelian perspective and the Buddhist perspective in quite an effective way to provide us with Buddhist ethics which are this life only.
Brilliant, and we'll get to that in another video. Thank
Indeed.
you very much,
Thank you.
Martin.